The morning began as if it had been pressed flat. Traffic on I-95 moved in a slow, compressed flow, every car holding the same careful distance, as if drivers sensed something but wouldn't name it. Headlights stayed on longer than usual. In the neighborhoods of Silver Spring and Alexandria, older residents stepped out to pick up newspapers that carried no new headlines, yet felt heavier in the hand. The air was cool, sharp, almost metallic. Local radio stations broke rhythm first. Between weather updates and commuter reports, clipped bulletins slipped in, mentions of a raised readiness level, nothing definitive, only the phrase, heightened posture under NORAD guidance. The signal cut once or twice, replaced by a short burst of static. People let it pass as equipment trouble. Still, the pauses hung in the car cabins longer than normal. In downtown D.C., office towers lit up floor by floor, but the glow seemed slow to rise. Elevators ran with a faint shudder. Hospital entrances saw an early surge of patients, mostly routine appointments. Yet the staff moved with restrained urgency, eyes flicking to silent television screens mounted near reception. Across waiting rooms, no one made small talk. Even the coffee machines hissed too loud. A brief message circulated through government corridors about DEFCON adjustments. It wasn't an announcement, more a leak that spread sideways through personal calls and overheard conversations. When a Maryland public radio host tried to report on it, her voice caught mid-sentence before the audio dropped. The station returned with music, low and steady, as though trying not to trigger anyone's pulse. Mobile notifications faltered around 8:20 a.m. Phones froze for seconds at a time, a wave of people checking the same handful of sources. At bus stops, commuters lifted their screens, saw the delay, frowned, and tucked the devices away. Morning overload. They muttered, but the explanation felt thin. In a small Arlington kitchen, a man in his 50s rummaged for his blood pressure pills, his hand steady but too slow. A few blocks away, a retired woman dialed her daughter without a reason, leaving a voicemail that said only, "Call when you're up." The message carried no fear, but it carried weight. By 9 a.m., the city's ambient sound changed. Sirens of routine ambulance runs echoed farther, as if the air itself carried them with less resistance. On the metro, lights flickered in short, timed intervals. Riders glanced up, but did not speak. A teenage boy removed his headphones, not to listen to anything in particular, but because silence felt safer. Screens in cafes showed a looping map with a quiet headline. NORAD reports unusual activity. No context. No expert panel. Customers watched for a moment, then looked away, cups held midair. People in line shifted forward without conversation, moving as a single slow body. Then it came, one long, level tone from the citywide alert system. Not an alarm, not an instruction. Just a test signal stretched past the usual 3 seconds, pressed into the air until it felt like the entire region was holding its breath. Windows trembled lightly. Birds lifted off power lines in a single motion. When the tone finally died, it left behind a stillness that did not match the hour. The morning didn't continue. It stalled, suspended between what people thought they knew and what no one could yet say. The city exhaled all at once, but the breath sounded cold. The long tone faded, but it did not release the city. For several minutes, nothing obvious happened, yet routines began to fray. At an intersection near Union Station, traffic lights slipped out of sync. Drivers rolled forward, braked, rolled again. No one used the horn. People watched the signals instead of each other. In Baltimore, office workers drifted toward break rooms, pulled by the glow of televisions. Networks replayed the same visuals: a Pentagon exterior, a NORAD logo, a line about elevated defense readiness under established protocols. Anchors spoke carefully, using phrases like "no cause for alarm" that had the opposite effect. On the Beltway, gas stations filled with cars that had already been driving when the tone sounded. Some drivers said they were topping off, just in case. Others said nothing, stood by the pump and checked their phones. Service bars came and went. Messages appeared late, in small clusters. The first clear disruption hit the grid after 10. In neighborhoods between D.C. and Baltimore, lights dimmed and surged in the span of a breath. Hospital monitors blinked, then recovered. Television screens washed out to gray. A local channel cut to a report on limited cyber incidents targeting power infrastructure in the mid-Atlantic, then lost audio mid-sentence. The image froze. In a suburban mall north of the city, an announcement broke over the music. The building would close, pending clarification of the ongoing situation. The words were calm, scripted. Shoppers in mid-transaction stopped. Cashiers held bills in the air, then slid them back. A quiet wave moved from store to store. Local radio tried to fill the gaps. One station in Prince George's County broke into its playlist with a flat, automated voice instructing residents to proceed to designated shelter areas. Seconds later, a live announcer interrupted, calling it an error and asking listeners to disregard it. Most people remembered only the first message. Patterns shifted. In grocery aisles, carts grew more crowded. Bottled water and canned goods moved first, then medications. At the same time, many commuters turned around and drove home, pulled by the need to be with family. Highways showed both flows. Lanes toward the city still full, exits jammed with cars trying to leave. From above, the East Coast still looked normal, roads lit, airports active. On the ground, the timing was off. Elevators paused a fraction too long. Bank lobbies emptied faster than lunch counters. Around noon, the next shift arrived, a broad, almost simultaneous sag in voltage along the corridor. For a few seconds that felt longer than they were, much of the seaboard went dark. Office towers, row houses, nursing homes, tunnels, and overpasses dropped into the same absence of light. Cooling fans wound down. In that gap, before generators started, the region heard a distant, undefined roar. Maybe aircraft, maybe transformers failing. No one could say where it came from. The darkness held longer than anyone expected. It wasn't total. Pockets of backup power flickered alive, but it was enough to pull the city into an unfamiliar quiet. Streets near Columbia Heights, Towson, and Laurel dimmed to scattered points of generator light. Without the hum of HVAC systems, the air felt colder, thinner. People stepped outside as if pulled by instinct, listening for what might come next. Along residential blocks, neighbors gathered on porches with flashlights aimed downward, beams kept tight. No one wanted to draw attention, though no one could explain why. They spoke in low tones about the outage, about the morning's alerts, about what they thought they heard in that moment of blackout. Some said it was aircraft. Others insisted it was only the cascade of failing transformers. The lack of certainty settled into everyone's posture. Small clusters formed at intersections. Cars moved slowly, headlights sweeping across empty sidewalks. Without traffic signals, drivers treated every crossing as a negotiation, pausing longer than necessary. A few rolled down windows to ask for updates, then drove on when no one had answers. Inside a row house basement in Hyattsville, a 70-year-old woman placed an old battery radio on a folding table. Neighbors trickled in, carrying blankets, bottled water, and whatever spare batteries they could find. Someone produced a half-used pack of AAs like it was rare currency. They rotated the radio dial through bands of static until a thin, wavering signal came through. One of the small emergency studios operating on generator power somewhere in Northern Virginia. The voice on the broadcast sounded calm but strained, describing a regional systems incident under federal review, offering no timeline, only the instruction to remain in place if safe. Across the region, fire stations turned into improvised information centers. People lined up outside the bay doors, shuffling quietly, waiting for anything more than rumor. Firefighters stood in reflective jackets, talking to each other in clipped sentences, comparing notes from county dispatch, FEMA advisories, and DHS bulletins, none of which fully matched. When residents asked direct questions, the answers stayed measured. We're evaluating, we're waiting for confirmation, stay nearby. The lack of clarity spread faster than any official message. On the Beltway, the outage thinned traffic. Drivers pulled onto shoulders, stepped out to look at the sky. Without the usual glow from the cities, the horizon over the Potomac looked unfamiliar, darker, wider. Faint sirens drifted across long distances, their echoes stretching between industrial buildings and quiet suburbs. Then came the unexpected pulse on certain phones, an alert banner flashing, radiation advisory, high levels detected. The message vanished seconds later, replaced by a correction blaming a regional test malfunction. but only some devices had shown it. That unevenness mattered. Word spread in fragments. A neighbor who saw the alert, a co-worker who didn't, a cousin in Arlington who swore it was real. The uncertainty settled like frost, thin but everywhere. Time slowed. Minutes stretched. People moved less, spoke less, waited more. Some sat in their cars with the engine off, listening for anything beyond the faint drone of generators. Others stood in driveways looking upward, as though the sky might change color if watched closely enough. Hours into the blackout, the emergency broadcast cut through the static. A clipped male voice, distorted by interference. Stand by for further instructions. The rest dissolved into noise. The message repeated once, shorter, more fragmented, before the signal collapsed entirely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the dark itself. The fragmentary message faded, leaving a silence that felt sharper than noise. At the local emergency operations centers across Maryland and Pennsylvania, dim backup lights cast long shadows across maps taped to the walls. Staff read the same brief DHS line again and again, temporary loss of select communication lines, and traded looks that said it meant less than it claimed. The statement was too broad, too polished. It offered no anchor. Neighborhoods began watching each other for cues. In the suburbs outside Harrisburg, one block shut off its remaining lights and loaded cars. The next block, unsure why, did the same. Along I-76, traffic thickened in both directions, not fast or panicked, just steady, as if everyone needed to test whether others were leaving too. Headlights glowed in a continuous ribbon through the foothills. A local station in western Pennsylvania tried to resume normal programming. For a moment, viewers saw a map with shaded zones labeled restricted movement areas. The image lasted less than a second before the feed cut to black. That single flash multiplied in seconds, screenshots, descriptions, guesses. No one knew whether the map was real, but its outline lingered in people's minds, sharper than any official correction. In Ohio towns along the state line, a muffled recording leaked online. An EOC employee muttering the word evacuation in a hurried, private exchange. The clip was short, missing context, ending mid-sentence. But context didn't matter anymore. Families began packing bags, not out of fear, but out of caution sharpened by exhaustion. People had spent hours waiting for clarity that never came. At a grocery store in Lancaster, carts moved slowly, almost reluctantly. People grabbed basics, water, crackers, batteries, but their eyes stayed down. Conversations were brief, half-whispered assessments. Any updates? Heard the same. Near the pharmacy aisle, a veteran in his late 50s tuned an old transistor radio, rotating the dial with careful precision, searching for a steady broadcast. All he found was layered static, like several signals speaking over each other. A few states west, a nurse tried calling her mother again. The signal held until the first ring, then dropped. She tried twice more, each attempt ending in the same clipped silence. On the macro level, the region looked like a patchwork of shifting reactions. Some towns darkened entirely. Others glowed with generator light. Highways pulsed with movement, not chaotic but deeply uneasy. People weren't fleeing. They were mirroring one another, acting on the assumption that neighboring communities knew something they did not. Late in the afternoon, as the sun dipped behind industrial lots outside Youngstown, a single siren tore across the air, short, sharp, unmistakably urgent. Not a test, not routine. It echoed off warehouses and rolled through residential streets. For a brief second, the whole region seemed to freeze. The city inhaled and held the breath. The siren's echo hadn't finished fading when movement began. Not fast, not frantic, more like a collective shift from watching to acting. In towns outside Pittsburgh and Cleveland, people headed to places they remembered from old emergency drills, school gyms, municipal basements, community centers. Some carried bags they packed hours earlier. Others grabbed only jackets and flashlights. At a high school in western Pennsylvania, the gym doors were propped open by folding chairs. Families stepped inside cautiously, uncertain whether they were early or too late. The light came from a single generator humming near the entrance, throwing a dull yellow glow across the bleachers. No staff had arrived yet. People formed loose lines out of habit, waiting for instructions that didn't come. On I-80, traffic thickened near gas stations. Drivers filled tanks without speaking, eyes fixed on the horizon. Trunks held jugs of water, blankets, cartons of food. A few people checked news apps only to watch them spin endlessly. Self-appointed guides tried recalling civil defense steps from decades past. Stay low, stay inside, seal windows. Their voices were steady, but their memories uncertain. Hospitals across the region posted handwritten signs at entrances, critical cases only. The overload wasn't medical, it was behavioral. Dozens had arrived asking about radiation, contamination, air quality. Staff repeated the same message. No confirmed threats, resources limited. The repetition wore everyone down. In a Cleveland suburb, two outdated civil defense sirens activated minutes apart, the old mechanical kind with a rising wail. Neither came with official confirmation. Their timing was off, their tones uneven, but the sound carried enough authority to tilt entire neighborhoods into motion. People locked doors, shut blinds, gathered relatives from next door. A few headed to larger shelters, only to find them dark, understaffed, or already full of confused residents. Rumors spread between shelters. Another building closed. A center in the next town turning people away. A basement that had someone in charge, though no one knew who. The uncertainty triggered another wave of movement. Groups who had just settled repacked and walked out again, flashlights bobbing in the early evening. A 67-year-old man helped his neighbor carry water down a narrow basement stairwell. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls. Down the street, a woman in her 50s tried to reconstruct instructions she learned as a child. Cover openings, keep radios on low, ration batteries, but the details blurred. She apologized to her family for not remembering. Across the region, a strange rhythm took hold. Doors closing, garage latches clicking, footsteps descending into cellars. Streets filled with scattered pinpoints of flashlight beams, then dimmed as house after house sealed itself for the night. From somewhere far overhead, engines rumbled, heavy, slow, unverified. Then, just as people began to settle, a dull boom rolled across the distance. Not thunder, too flat, too heavy. The sound reached shelters and basements seconds apart. Radios hissed, then fell silent. The pause that followed felt unnatural, as if the whole system had gone quiet at once. The boom settled into the night like a weight, and for a moment no one breathed. In basements and school shelters across the Appalachians, people waited for a second blast that never came. A single battery lantern in each room cast narrow cones of light on concrete floors. No one spoke above a whisper. The air smelled of metal, dust, and stored water. Minutes passed without radio updates. The silence from official channels felt intentional, though no one could prove it. When a small hospital in a mountain town finally checked its instruments, the reports spread quickly. The explosion had been a transformer failure under stress. The relief was real but fragile, too thin to settle nerves. Amateur radio operators became the closest thing to authority. Their voices crackled through static, describing unusual military flights over Tennessee, Kentucky, and southern Ohio. The information was vague, secondhand, yet it carried more weight than anything from federal sources. Trust shifted quietly, almost automatically. Then a clear transmission cut through the noise, a single NORAD line, tracking multiple signals, no context, no follow-up. The message hung in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. Some believed it pointed to another system's failure. Others thought it meant something worse. The uncertainty pressed into every room. Across small towns, people began moving in unison. Families stepped outside shelters just to scan the sky, listening for engines or sirens. Streets stayed dark except for brief flashes of flashlight beams as neighbors checked on one another. No one lingered long. Every sound felt sharper. In one basement, a man held a portable radio to his ear, turning the dial millimeter by millimeter for any sign of clarity. All he found was layered static, punctuated by distant rumbling overhead. In another house, children tried to sleep while adults whispered about what they would do if the next alert came without explanation. Close to midnight, aircraft thunder rolled across the ridgeline, steady, organized, unmistakable. People froze where they stood. A nearby radio channel, quiet for nearly an hour, suddenly came through clean and unbroken. Stand by. The word hung in the dark like a held breath, and the night waited with it.